Sara Gottfried is a board-certified physician who graduated from Harvard and MIT. She practices evidence-based, integrative, precision, and functional medicine. She is the clinical assistant professor in the Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences at Thomas Jefferson University and the director of precision medicine at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health. Her 3 New York Times bestselling books include The Hormone Cure, The Hormone Reset Diet, and Younger. Her newest book is called Women, Food, and Hormones and will be released in September. To learn more, go to themarcusinstitute.jeffersonhealth.org. All right, you guys, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have Dr. Sara. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, well, I have been following along for such a long time. We met at Dave Asprey's conference. I think it was maybe in 2013 or 2012, a long, long time ago. And I just love everything, all the information you've put out for women over the years. And I really think you give people the tools to start taking care of themselves. So thank you for all of your time. I know writing a book is a labor of love. So I appreciate it. And I know so many of your readers do too. All right.
Thank you so much. Yeah, 2012, that was like before you had kids.
Yeah, way before I had kids. And now I'm on the back end. Now I'm on the back end of what we were talking about before the show, sleep deprivation and, in the throes of the toddler life and the newborn life. And you actually trained as an OBGYN.
I did.
So what have you seen in your practice when it comes to, I know you're the hormone queen, when it comes to recovery and hormones and sleep?
Well, I think they're intimately involved. I think there's this interdependence between those different systems that we want to be thinking about. And, I don't deliver babies anymore. I gave that up after my first baby was born. But I think a lot about women before pregnancy, during pregnancy, postpartum especially. I think that 4th trimester we need to be paying a lot of attention to. And my heart goes out to women who really struggle with those postpartum months. So, mood issues, I feel like those should be considered. Thyroid dysfunction, maybe even Hashimoto's until proven otherwise. We need to really be taking care of and supporting women postpartum, I think, in a whole new way.
That's pretty profound. If you could maybe wave a magic wand, what would you have postpartum? Would you have women in their postpartum months be hormone tested or genetically tested? What would you be looking for if money was no option and you could dive deep into what was going on with them?
Well, I would actually check before pregnancy. So I'd like to do a full genomic panel. There's one panel in particular that I have in mind here that looks, not at a specific gene and says, oh, you need more methylated folate, but the bigger picture, like what are the cellular pathways for detoxification, for methylation, for inflammation, and for oxidative stress? What are some of those markers that tell you about whether you're going to do well with sleep deprivation, like the clock gene? What are some of those pathways related to female hormone balance? And I remember listening to a podcast that you recorded where you were talking about being on book tour with your first pregnancy. So I'd want to do a full hormone panel, again, before pregnancy, looking at what's your baseline cortisol? What's your pattern over the course of the day? What's your diurnal cortisol? What's your DHEA, your testosterone, your estrogen, your progesterone? How are these hormones dancing together? And then during pregnancy, the hormones change quite a bit. Estriol, one of the other forms of estrogen, becomes really high. Progesterone's really high. And then you go from these very high levels to almost nothing when you deliver that beautiful baby in your placenta. And then I want to check the hormones again. So your genomics aren't going to change, but the way that they interact with your environment, with how much sleep you're getting, again, I think of that clock gene. We want to be optimizing the environment so that your genes can really empower you so that you feel your fullest and your most able to serve your mission, whatever that is, really focused on your baby. Maybe your mission in the world is shared with taking care of that baby. So I think that would be a basic precision medicine protocol that I would put my patients on.
I love it. So prior to pregnancy, we're getting genetic testing and we're getting a hormone panel. Are there any red flags that you would look for on a hormone panel prior to someone getting pregnant that would be, I guess, like a red flag for you?
Well, there's a lot of red flags. So, before someone's tried to get pregnant, I'm always thinking about what I lovingly call the hormonal Charlie's Angels. So I'm
Yes.
looking at cortisol, thyroid, and estrogen. And specifically, I'm looking for whether there's an issue with the control system being a little off. So that's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And that can be from, working too hard. I think uh, when you were talking in this podcast, you were talking about being on book tour, which is very stressful. My experience with book tours is that you're traveling, you're flying. This is before COVID, of course. And often it's on the East Coast or it's international. You're not getting a lot of sleep. You're staying out late, going to these book events. And so short sleep can really impact cortisol the next day. Throw in a few drinks at night, and that also raises your cortisol. It can mess with insulin. We want to be looking at insulin glucose and that balance, that metabolic flexibility that I know you love to talk about too. And then with the thyroid, women who are trying to get pregnant, we actually want their thyroid in a more narrow range. So we want their TSH to be between about 0.3 and 2.5. So I'm looking at that, but I want it even more optimal than that. And that's not just women who are trying to get pregnant. I think all women deserve that sort of tight range. And then with estrogen, progesterone, I'm looking at a balance between the two so that there's not what I think of as dysestrogenism, what other people talk about as estrogen dominance. And then, of course, there's testosterone gets into the mix related to polycystic ovary syndrome, which is the number one cause for women not being able to get pregnant and also struggling with weight loss. One other thing I would add, which I think is relevant for hormone balance, is that if I get, a wish list here of anything I want, I would add micronutrient testing. So I want to know, are you getting the cofactors? Do you get the vitamin B6 that helps you with making serotonin? Do you get the magnesium that helps you with making more of the benevolent types of estrogen metabolites? So I'm getting kind of geeky and a little deep here. But, one other thing I love with the micronutrient test, and we can talk about some of the labs that do this, is I love to screen for a couple of other things. Dysbiosis, possibly increased intestinal permeability, and also fungal overgrowth. So those are some factors that can really impact a pregnancy and postpartum period.
So what tests do you love for micronutrient like balance and understanding if someone had suboptimal or optimal levels?
So I've been running Genova's NutriVal for I don't know,
It's the
15, 20
best.
years. It's such a good test. It's been a little harder to run it during COVID because, some patients haven't been excited about going to the lab and getting all those tubes drawn. So what I love about Genova is that they pivoted and they developed this other test called the metabolomics, which is very similar, as you may know, to the NutriVal. You have to specifically request heavy metals, which is another thing I want to look for before pregnancy, because so many of my patients are positive for heavy metals and have no idea. So metabolomics with heavy metals or the NutriVal. But there's one exception here. If I have a patient that I'm worried about cardiovascular disease, and I really think about pregnancy as a stress test. Some people pass the stress test with flying colors. I suspect you probably did, Kelly, hearing about how you exercise through your pregnancies. But some women don't. They develop preeclampsia, they develop preterm labor, they have either a small for gestational age baby or a large for gestational age baby. And they have these early signs of vascular dysfunction that can cause problems either in the pregnancy or 20 to 30 years later. So in those patients, I'll actually run a SpectraCell micronutrient test. It's just a little bit different. It looks more specifically at cardiovascular issues.
What would be a sign or symptom that a client may have cardiovascular issues?
Well, the main thing I look for, I always start with glucose and insulin because I think that that's an important window into how you're going to perform with the stress test. A lot of women I just had a patient yesterday who failed her glucose tolerance test. So she did that 1 hour test where you have to drink that horrible sugary soda, and then you get your blood drawn an hour later. So she failed it in all of her pregnancies. And then she did the 3-hour test and she passed it.
Mhm.
But I was saying to her, listen, you have pre-diabetes now. Like you've been having an issue with your blood sugar going back 20 years to, when you failed that glucose tolerance test. I don't like the word failure, but,
Yeah.
she had early evidence of problems. And she also had a baby that was over 9 pounds. Like that's another sign of insulin being too high, insulin like growth hormone being too high and stimulating the size of the baby. It's a growth hormone.
Right.
So I would say glucose and insulin is the first thing that I look at in terms of cardiovascular risk. We also know that women have cardiovascular disease that it gets established at lower glucose levels than men. So a lot of the original data looking at diabetes and kind of this threshold that's somewhat arbitrary between diabetes and pre-diabetes, it's men who develop problems when their fasting glucose is greater than 125, but women actually develop problems at a lower glucose, more like 110 to 115.
Yeah. So sensitive, and obviously like elevated glucose is going to create problems in a pregnancy, and you're going to pass those down to your children. Other than large birth weight, what are some side effects you're seeing with elevated blood sugar in pregnancy?
Well, the list is long, and I had a lot of these because I've got some glucose issues. I work really hard to remain metabolically flexible. But one of the things I had was I was hungry all the time. Like I remember just standing in front of the refrigerator, like, when is it time to eat again? And I gained a lot of weight. I gained like 50, 60 pounds. And I would say there's a couple of issues here. I have a tendency toward disordered eating.
Mhm.
I had anorexia when I was a teenager, and disordered eating can, even if you are somewhat healed and recovered from it, pregnancy and the demands and the hormones of pregnancy can drive you toward disordered eating again. So I was definitely binging, and I think that's common.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other signs of glucose and insulin being out of whack. There's mood issues. It's high insulin is related to greater inflammation. So you may notice your joints are more achy. Uh, your blood vessels may not be working as well. You might be more inclined to have edema, like swelling in your ankles. The other thing I'm looking for is a family history, especially of pre-diabetes. I'm looking for premature cardiovascular disease, and I want to do that genomic test to look for that in a patient. But I'm also looking for, do you have members of your family who have pre-diabetes? And we know that somewhere around 85 to 90% of people don't even know that they have pre-diabetes. So that's the reason why we have to be checking for these things.
I love it. There are so many times where I sit down with a client and they've been diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome and know nothing about their glucose control. They have no idea what being metabolically flexible means. Their doctors made no recommendations to change their diet. And you're doing the opposite. It's doctors like you that really pave the way for people to understand that lifestyle has such a major impact on their disease state, some of these that are lifestyle-based diseases. So it's
amen, sister. I would say what I was taught in medical school, here's kind of the quandary that I think we're stuck with, that we have to change. Like, this is our job, Kelly. We have to take this on and have a revolution. I was taught in medical school that diet and lifestyle is the number one most effective way of treating diabetes. So I was taught that, okay, so we've got a lot of evidence behind it, lots of peer-reviewed studies that show this, better than a drug. And then I was also given about 30 minutes of nutrition education. So how do we, there's a total disconnect between those two. And things have not really changed in medical school. And, I remember hearing Andrew Weil, that guy with the white beard.
yeah, I love him. He's like the Santa Claus of nutrition.
He's like the Santa Claus of nutrition. And he talked about how he got 30 minutes of nutrition education in medical school. Then I go to the same place and it hasn't changed. And he's quite a bit older than me.
Yeah.
So, we really have to change this. And you raise PCOS, which I think is really important. So another thing that women struggle with when glucose and insulin are off, and I'm even talking within the normal range, we can see some subfertility, like it may not be as easy to get pregnant. It can be very difficult. You go to your conventional doctor who, bless them, says, eat less, exercise more, doesn't bother to mention any of the supplements that can actually help with that, and a specific plan that's been proven to make a difference. But they get that advice, and they have total weight loss resistance. So it's very difficult for them to even implement the very thin plan that they got from the conventional doctor, because they have weight loss resistance. Their insulin's high, their glucose is high, and it's just very hard to manage.
Definitely. It's frustrating that there's such little nutrition training, and then and then integrating that nutrition with the work that you do in Western medicine, and making recommendations for, or reading labs and making recommendations for drugs if needed, or supplements if needed. You just mentioned supplements for glucose control. Do you have favorites that you use with clients, and that you recommend?
Sure. Well, the way I work in precision medicine is I like to design an N of one experiment. So I don't know if you were planning to go full nerd with me, but this is just how I roll.
I'm super into it. Give me that Harvard MIT education. Let's do this.
Okay, let's do this. So do you have a continuous glucose monitor in your arm right now?
I have levels on my arm right now.
Yeah, me too. So what I like to do is to insert a continuous glucose monitor. I think Levels is a great choice. Some of my patients get it through a pharmacy, and their insurance pays for it. So we do it, by whatever means possible. And I think that kind of personalized data is really essential. And I especially like it during pregnancy, because I want to know, when you drink that horrible sugary drink, that's kind of a necessary evil. I want to be tracking what happens with the glucose over that hour or over that 3 hours. So with an N of one experiment, we do this baseline data. So I imagine you have many weeks of baseline data looking at your glucose. And then we want to do this N of one intervention where we try, you could try a combination of different insulin sensitizers. If I have someone who comes to see me and isn't on any supplements, they're like a supplement virgin, which almost never happens. But if that were to happen, I would try omega-3s, probably, depending on cardiovascular risk, around 2 to 4 grams a day.
Okay.
And I would combine that maybe with SPMs, because we know that, in someone who's overweight or obese, often the inflammation signature is altered. So specialized pro-resolving mediators may be able to help with that. I would also consider chromium, berberine. I'm laughing because my daughter made this video where she was mimicking me, talking about my telomeres and how I was aging too fast and my glucose was a nightmare. And she was like, and I take bird brain. I was like, bird brain?
Almost.
You mean berberine?
She's trolling you on the internet.
This is going to happen to you soon, Kelly. You're going to have your sons making videos of you, checking your glucose and how you talk about it. This is coming soon. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So berberine, gymnema, I don't try everything at once, because we want to find, everyone has this sort of individual response and this bio-individuality. So we want to figure out, okay, what's really going to move the needle for you?
Right. It's interesting. I love Levels, and I love an experiment N of one, because I think it's really empowering for people to see how their bio-individuality, how they are an individual human who responds differently. Like my response to a piece of pizza versus a date versus, squash and sweet potato, it's completely different than someone else. My husband may be able to handle it. A client may be just great with it. And I'm in a pre-diabetic state, after 3 dates. And I'm showing that on Instagram. Look, this is you just need to be aware that the, whatever the fruit cereal that everyone's eating for breakfast right now on TikTok with a bunch of fruit covered in coconut water may not be the right plan for you.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because I think what's happened in the past is this more paternalistic approach to collecting data on yourself, where you turn over your power to this physician. You get your labs drawn, maybe once a year, including maybe a fasting glucose, a comprehensive metabolic panel, perhaps a CBC, maybe some cholesterol. And otherwise, you're kind of blind to what's going on inside your body. So to now have these devices where we can track what's happening with your glucose in a continuous way, and we can really dial in that individual response. I think that's essential. It's going to transform the way that we practice medicine. It's also going to transform, I think, the empowerment of patients being able to say, okay, I'm not going to outsource my health to this doctor that I see for 7 minutes a year. I'm going to own it myself and have this immediate biofeedback so that I can figure out, okay, the coconut water with the fruit is not the best choice for me. I'm much better off with some eggs and broccoli. Like, we have to individualize the nutrition.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to something you just said. You were talking about your daughter trolling you on the internet and aging. I'd love for you to discuss, maybe we can dive a little deeper into aging. What are some of the factors that accelerate aging? And how can we prevent that?
There's a lot of factors that accelerate aging. We've talked already about some of them. I would say stress is probably the number one thing. And I joke sometimes that I've had almost every hormone imbalance that a woman can have. And it, starting in probably my 20s with my medical training. And what happened for me is that I think in my 20s, when I was working 120 hours a week, this was before we had reform in medicine. I think I had a set point for how much stress I was used to. And anything less than that became kind of boring and dull. So I had to really work with this, especially once I had kids. But in my 30s, what I found was that once I started to test things like my cortisol level, I found that it was about 3 times what it should have been. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist at UCSF, and I was like, oh my God, look at this cortisol. Like, it's in the 30s. It was the AM serum cortisol. And she's like, yeah, every female doctor I know has a cortisol that's 3 times what it should be. So it shouldn't be like that. Like, we really need to get cortisol back to this Goldilocks position where it's not too high, not too low. We don't freak out if it's too high, but we just figure out for ourselves what's really going to work. So, there's a number of things that help me, but there was some cost to that. So when I first tested my telomeres, what I found was that they were like these teeny little nubs of almost nothing left. And I tested myself around age 45, and I had the telomeres, which predicts your biological age, the telomeres of a 65-year-old woman.
Wow.
So this is what my daughter was joking about because she thought it was hysterically funny. So that's, when you get that result, it's not the best day. It's like, oh, I got to do something about this. So I would say cortisol is the first thing. The second thing is hormones. So, I love hormones. It's not the only thing that I do because I think it's an important portal. But we have to have this bigger perspective of all the other pieces that are involved, like the gut and micronutrients and nutrition and how you're exercising and purpose and meaning. Like, all these other pieces are really important too. But with hormones, I would say cortisol is a hormone, of course, but
yes,
insulin, leptin, ghrelin, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, all of these are involved in the aging process. And it can become accelerated. I think of postpartum as being kind of this preview of what happens in perimenopause. So we can talk more about that if you want, but let me focus on trying to answer your question, which I'm so excited about. I can hardly contain myself. The other factor I would say is muscle. So I was really sad to learn that you lose about 5 pounds of muscle per decade after age 40, and you gain about 5 pounds of fat. And that's in people who stay the same weight. So, also not good news. It means that you have to actively work to maintain your muscle mass, especially the 2B muscle fibers, the ones that are involved in explosive movements like burpees and plyometrics, the things that we all love the most.
Yeah. You mean my yoga doesn't count?
I wish yoga counted. I mean, yoga does so much for cortisol. We know it lowers cortisol. It helps to lower inflammation in the body. It lowers interleukin-6. It does so many beneficial things, but not so much for those explosive muscle fibers. So there's other factors too. There's endocrine disruptors. There's, toxic fat, kind of angry fat in your body that's inflamed, that can secrete adipokines and cytokines, make you age too fast. And then in terms of environmental factors, endocrine disruptors, heavy metals, we talked a bit about those. They definitely can accelerate the aging process. Maybe EMFs, that data is not quite as clear. It's like a whole Pandora's box. I don't know if you want to go there, but that's another area that I think of. So those are the main factors that I consider in terms of accelerated aging.
It's interesting because, you mentioned in the beginning the lifestyle factors like nutrition, working out, and sleep, and all of these things, but always kind of going back to the hormones. And what I think of and what's so interesting to me is that all those lifestyle factors are going to influence the hormones. So it's almost like looking at the hormones, you can say like, oh, your cortisol's high, you're probably not sleeping that great, you're stressed out, maybe you don't have a meditation or yoga practice maybe. Then you look at elevated insulin and you're like, oh, the diet's not really that great, what's going on here? And then you can look at maybe the downstream of that of like the estrogen and sex hormone balance that may be affected by that. So you're getting the look at the other things by looking at those hormones. And I love that you've broken those down in your books. And I'm going to bring you back to Charlie's Angels because I want people to understand what these 3 hormones are, what they do in the body, and how they interact. Can you walk us through I think it's a great analogy, and I want people to really understand it when they walk away from this podcast.
Definitely can do that. I want to just comment that I think that's a really astute observation about, I'm talking about hormones and the importance of hormones for the aging process, but embedded in looking at your hormones is all of these lifestyle factors, what you're eating, what's going on with your gut function, how that talks to your immune system, the exposures that you have, including SARS-CoV-2. It includes sleep. We know that short sleep's associated with an accelerated aging process. So I'm really glad that you connected those dots. So Charlie's Angels, my favorite topic. We've talked quite a bit about cortisol. So I like that we can step back and say a little bit about what this does. So cortisol is made in the adrenal glands. The brain controls the release of cortisol in your body. So the hypothalamus and pituitary in your brain talk to your adrenals. And cortisol has a lot of jobs. Pretty much all these hormones have like 400 jobs. But the main jobs you want to think about with cortisol are, number 1, fight, flight, freeze. So it's designed to get you out of a crisis. It's designed to help you, if you've got a tiger that is looking at you and you're trying to figure out how to escape the tiger, like it's going to help you run. Which doesn't work out so well. It's going to help you climb a tree. It's going to help you fight. Also wouldn't go so well. Would also potentially cause you to freeze. Not such an adaptive response, but apparently that works with bears. So cortisol has this role with fight, flight, freeze. It also has a role with glucose. So it's designed to raise your glucose. So, whenever I look at my continuous glucose data, what I always see is that if I'm seeing patients, my glucose goes up about 10 points, not that much, but I get super excited about seeing patients and my fight, flight, freeze gets activated. So it's just the sympathetic stress response, and you can see the effect from cortisol. So it also modulates the immune system, which is incredibly important. So we know that people who are more stressed are more likely to get a viral infection. This was actually shown back in 1993 in the New England Journal of Medicine by Cohen et al. And he actually looked at 5 different viruses, including a coronavirus. So this was way back decades ago, showing that you're more likely to get infected with a virus if you're stressed. He used something called the perceived stress scale, which you can Google and you can check it yourself. It's something I like to use in my patients, but I also like to measure cortisol directly. So that's cortisol. Your thyroid is, I think of the thyroid as this master gland. I even have like a stuffy thyroid here somewhere. So the thyroid, the brain again controls it. So this is now the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. And we're actually going to put all of this together towards the end of the Charlie's Angels conversation. So A lot of people used to think thyroid, okay, it's involved in metabolism, it's the gas pedal for your cells. But even though the control system is in your brain, every single cell you have in your body has thyroid receptors. So thyroid is this really essential master gland, master hormone that modulates function. So it's involved in keeping the hair on your head, keeping the hair on your eyebrows so that you've got the outer third filled out, you've got eyelashes. When thyroid is disrupted, it's associated with weight gain, puffiness, more inflammation, higher cholesterol. So I like to keep TSH between 1 to 2 in my patients who've got dyslipidemia or abnormal cholesterol. It's involved in muscle movement, so you can have decreased tendon reflexes. That's one of the things we used to check back before telehealth. It's involved in libido and sex drive. So this is one of those factors that I'm always looking at. It's definitely involved in mood. So one of the treatments for treatment-resistant depression is to add T3, one of the thyroid hormones, onto an antidepressant. I actually think we should be looking further upstream and seeing, before we start an antidepressant, looking at a more integrative approach to how to take care of that patient, maybe giving them thyroid hormone.
Wow.
So it's involved in a lot of different things. That's thyroid. It's kind of in charge of metabolism. It's the gas pedal, but it has this bigger focus. Then estrogen. So estrogen is what gives you breasts and hips. So it is this quintessential archetypal female hormone, but it also keeps your joints lubricated. Like if you have a frozen shoulder after going through perimenopause or menopause, it's probably related to estrogen. So estrogen builds up the lining of your uterus. I remember you had Jolene on your podcast and she talks so beautifully about sex ed and what's happening in the body. So estrogen is a builder. It kind of builds up, it grows the lining of your uterus, and then progesterone comes in and helps you. It's like the mortar. Estrogen's like bricks in your uterus, building up the bricks. Progesterone's like mortar. And then together, the bricks and mortar come out, ideally after a 25 to 28 day cycle. So estrogen has all of these jobs. It's controlled. It's made in a lot of different places in the body. So a lot of people think it's just made in the ovaries, but it's made in the testes. Men have estrogen too at lower levels. It's made in the bone, in the heart, and especially in the brain. So it's super important for brain function, especially for women over the age of 40. So what I think is important in terms of tying all these things together is that I don't think about, adjusting each one of these hormones individually. I think about the entire symphony and how we get this symphony to really come together to create beautiful music. And so we want to be thinking of the control system. So we talked about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, but you can put all of this together. And it's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal
thyroid
gonadal gut axis. Yay.
Wow.
So that's a mouthful, but you want to be thinking also about the role of the gut, so with the gut, back when I was crazy pants and like working 120 hours a week, I probably had really high CRH. So the control hormone for my cortisol was really high. We know that pokes holes in the lining of the gut wall. So it increases intestinal permeability. So I think I was running around with leaky gut for probably a decade or so. Then I had kids and it got a little worse. I had, so there's this crosstalk with the gut that I think is important. The gut is also really important for managing your estrogen levels. So if you don't get enough fiber, this is where fiber really comes in. If you're drinking too much alcohol, which also pokes holes in the gut, if you are making dysestrogenism as a result of drinking too much, this is probably my least popular message about alcohol and estrogen. But all of these things kind of come together and are interdependent.
So when you're talking about how cortisol, thyroid hormone, and estrogen communicate, and not wanting to adjust each individually, what are some like lifestyle, or how would you approach a client if you saw that these were out of whack?
Well, I think it starts first with nutrition. So I have a food first approach. I imagine that resonates with you.
Very much so.
So I think food is so essential. I just was talking about alcohol and fiber related to estrogen. So we know that, the average US woman gets about 13 grams of fiber a day, which is, about a third of what we should be getting. So I think it starts first with vegetables. I'm a big fan of eating a pound of vegetables a day. Just see what that does to your glucose. Like it's a beautiful thing to see the effect of really getting sufficient micronutrients. I'm a big fan of 5 colors of the rainbow every day so that you're filling those micronutrient gaps that we're going to check with the NutrIval or the metabolomics. So I think food is really essential, managing stress, figuring out what's going to work for you. What works for me, things like yoga and meditation may not be the thing that works for you. Other people benefit from sex as a way of managing cortisol. Orgasm is very effective at modulating some of these hormones. When it comes to the thyroid, I tend to put most of my patients on an elimination diet when I'm first working with them and before their tests have come back. And so that's gluten-free, dairy-free, possibly reduced histamine, kind of depending on what's going on if they have symptoms of histamine imbalance. So I start first with food, and then we might move on to supplements. But we want to be thinking, you mentioned the crosstalk between these hormones. So I talked about cortisol and its effect on the gut, but high and low cortisol can also affect thyroid function. Thyroid function, especially T4, modulates estrogen metabolism. So when you have enough T4, it helps you make the 2-hydroxyestrone in the estrogen pathway, which is the good pathway. It's the one that is more benevolent and protective in terms of the risk of breast cancer and endometriosis and other things. So that's the crosstalk between them. Food first, sleeping, on average 7 to 8.5 hours every night. Good sleep. I like to see deep sleep around 2 hours. I use Nora to track that. Having a life full of joy and meaning and purpose. You were talking about coming back from maternity leave and how much you love your work and kind of that push, pull, tug with breastfeeding your baby exclusively. I hope I'm not giving away anything private here.
No, I'm an open book.
So I think, having purpose and meaning that really pulls you forward is so essential to all of this. We also know that that's such a key part of slowing down the aging process so that we're not running around with telomeres that are tiny little nubs.
Yeah, I think it can be really frustrating for people to get their telomere length tested and to see that their biological age is beyond their birthday age. And trying to slow that process down like you have, and looking at their glucose and looking at, their hormones and their the lifestyle factors. But I love that you're bringing in purpose, because there is something to that. There's like a spiritual component here that really is maybe not as tangible in diagnostic testing, but that really you see the joy of life in people that have purpose and passion in something. So it's pretty profound.
I love that too. And I think, for a lot of this, there's biochemistry as part of the answer, getting the nutrition right, getting the micronutrients filled. But I think it's important that you're emphasizing the spiritual solution, which I think is embedded and integrated in all of this. So I think it's related to purpose and meaning, but it's also, it makes me think of a book that was really influential for me when I was struggling with food. This was a while ago. It was called If the Buddha Came to Dinner. And I love this idea that if you had an enlightened being who was coming over for dinner, what would you serve that enlightened being? Like, what would the plate look like? My husband might serve something different than me. Like, he loves grass-fed beef. He loves ribs. He's such a carnivore. And I would probably get that pound of vegetables. Like, I would do maybe a little bit of plant-based protein. I would serve the Buddha, if the Buddha were to come, a plate of mostly lightly steamed vegetables, like all different colors, kind of beautiful. And then the next step with this spiritual journey is to say, well, why aren't you serving that to yourself? Like, that's what we should be feeding ourselves every day. So I love that you kind of wove in this spiritual piece.
Well, it is what you just highlighted is like taking care of yourself if you cared for yourself like you would an enlightened being. And that goes deeper than, am I going to fit into my skinny jeans? Am I, getting my double days of working out in? Am I breaking my body down to look and feel my best? That's back to your early 20s of elevated cortisol, go, 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 get through medical school, be a high overachiever. And then kind of seeing the back end of that, which is shortened telomere length and needing to kind of coming full circle and going, I can be and take care of myself in the stillness of yoga and meditation. And that needs to be a part of the puzzle as well. I mean, in my personal experience with clients, I know that those who do yoga or meditate or have a breathwork practice or like play in a cul-de-sac with their kids or have some sort of like joyful release too, I see less binge eating. I see less cravings. I see, that when we're filling our plate with something else, we need less control in the food department. And it's something that is tangibly, I feel like it's tangible.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've got your finger on something super deep, which is I'm working with a coach who talks about this horizontal line and how we need to ask ourselves several times during the day, am I above the line or below the line? Above the line is in a state of trust and love and presence. Below the line is a state of fear, usually motivated by control, a desire for validation. And there's one other one I can't think of. Control, validation, approval. That's validation. There's another one that'll come to me. But just asking, am I above the line or below the line? And I think that's a really important measure of how you're showing up for yourself, like how you're showing up for your meal preparation, how much time you put into thinking about really feeding your DNA the best possible nutrients. And it's also about how you show up in the world, how you show up to your mission, how you show up for your kids and your community and your partner. I think that's really important. And, my experience was that when my cortisol was, crazy, I was below the line. I was looking for that approval, that validation. I wanted to control my environment. I was not in a state of peace and joy and trust.
So it's almost like below the line is scarcity, above the line is abundance.
Totally.
I love that. Well, I think, what you also alluded to is that you work with a coach. I think that some of the best really are always constantly trying to evolve and grow as a human being, as, a practitioner, as a partner, as a mother, whatever your calling and wherever you are in your life. And I love that you mentioned that. I'm curious as to how you're showing up for yourself in the day to day. What does a day in the life look like for Dr. Sara Gottfried?
Well, my coach and I are working on this. So this
is great. No, I love the vulnerability and honesty because I think, in every stage of life, you're writing a book again, or you're in the middle of a pandemic, or you have a flood of new clients because everyone has spent 2020 not taking care of themselves. Like whatever it may be, like it's whatever the new normal is, you have to continue to remind yourself to show up for yourself. It's not just you get it one day and you're done.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I would say I'm not totally on my game right now, which is why I wanted to work with this particular coach. And I wasn't spending as much time above the line as I want to. And I feel like, my job description is to help repair the world. Like that's part of what I want to do. I want to change the conversation about hormones and women's health. I also take care of executives and professional athletes, and I want to improve performance and use precision nutrition to really change health. But what my coach said, which I thought was really accurate, is that, Sara, you've got too many hell yeses. So I've been really good at, only saying yes to the things that are hell yeses, but then I got kind of a large volume of them. So I'm seeing patients Tuesday through Thursday, and I'm really devoted to that. I carved out this time to talk to you.
Thank you.
because I think we got rescheduled because of the fires in Northern California. I'm doing a lot of research looking at metabolic phenotyping. So how is it that people change from health to prediabetes? Like, what are the different types? Sometimes it's fasting glucose, sometimes it's postprandial glucose, sometimes it's because somebody went on a statin. So I'm really trying to define those with my research. And then my research just happened to have like 7 oral presentations due within a 2-week period. So my coach put me on a no diet. So instead of hell yes, she put me on a no diet. And so I've been practicing saying no. So the way my day looks, you are the first thing of the day. I try to exercise first thing in the morning so that I know myself, and I know if I wait until later in the day, it's not going to happen. So I got on my Peloton this morning after recording my husband, who is insane on the Peloton. So you can look at my stories to see some of this. I drink a full glass of water with electrolytes when I get up. Then I do a fasted workout. Then I do, this face situation as best I can. And then I start my day. So I have probably about 6, 7 appointments today, which is a little full. Like, I think women especially need block time that's unscheduled and unstructured. I think we really need that for cortisol and oxytocin and for staying above the line. Mm-hmm. I have a meeting with a professional sports team later today. So you and the sports team, I would say, are my apex meetings. And I'm really excited about that because I've got a lot of ideas about how we can change precision medicine for the athlete and how that maps to performance. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize that your genetics predict 40 to 50% of your performance. So it's fun to talk about that with these folks. I've got a meeting with my boss somewhere in there. And then I try to finish by about 5 and really have focused time with my family, where I tune into my husband, I look him in the eye, and I like really get a sense of what's going on for him, what his day was like. We get emotionally current, and then we make dinner. I was going to say we make dinner together. The truth is I make the dinner and he
hangs out.
He hangs out. He does a lot of hanging out. And then we have some sort of wind down. I've been tempted during the pandemic to watch more TV, and I've really tried to resist that. I mean, it happens some nights, but I really try to find some way to connect with him or with my daughters who are still living with us. One's in college and she's about to go back, but I have a 16-year-old too that I try to stay current with. So something that helps us stay connected. We might go for a walk after dinner. I love to do that. That's a pretty typical day.
I love it. I love that you mentioned block scheduling for women. I think, we tend, when you just looking at your day right there, like you're responsible for yourself and working out, then you're responsible for all your clients. And there's a block of time there. And then you're coming home and feeling responsible to like be the matriarch of your family and check in with everyone and make sure everyone else is doing okay too. It's a lot, always a lot on women to really kind of, you use the analogy that bricks were estrogen and progesterone was the mortar. And I do feel like we are the mortar in this analogy for our family, much like progesterone, holding everyone together, like keeping it strong. And that can tend to be a lot, and fueling ourselves appropriately through nutrition is equally as important for our ability to show up for our families. In that day, what are some of your favorite things to eat and to take care of your hormones and your energy levels and your cortisol levels?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love this point about us being like progesterone. Haven't thought about that before. So I really like that. And I would add one other nuance, which is we want to be functioning at our best as matriarchs, but we also want to be not over functioning. And I think that line can be a little blurry for a lot of us. I've been thinking a lot about overfunctioning, especially with my coach and the work we're doing with my schedule. So you asked about food. I've got like 3 different glasses of water, some with electrolytes that I'm surrounded by right now. I've got my sulforaphane here. So I like to take supplements in a fasted state, especially sulforaphane, because I know my detox pathways need it. And I'm generally in ketosis. I've been experimenting a little bit with adding carbs back, but I don't get hungry. So what I typically do is, depending on the day, like today, I'll probably eat around maybe 10:30 or 11. And I like to rotate my protein sources. So today I'm planning some duck eggs with greens. I've got these katsuma greens. They're like Japanese greens that kind of taste not bitter, but tastes kind of like spinach, I guess. So I'm going to cook that with some garlic, help my alien glutathione, do what I can with giving precursors. And I generally am gluten-free, dairy-free. So that's probably going to be my breakfast. But it's always, it's around the vegetable. So it's the vegetable, and then I add some sort of protein and fat. So I'm going to cook it in probably avocado oil. So that's pretty typical. I may not get hungry again until dinner. Frankly, I don't know what I'm going to cook for dinner tonight. I've got a few different options. I've got some salads that are left over from True Food, which is one of my favorite places. I just never feel like I'm inflamed after I eat at True Food. I'm not paid by them, but I love their chopped salad. So I'll probably make that together with, the carb I've been adding that has not been raising my blood sugar. So this is always a big win, right? I'm curious what yours are too. I've been making cauliflower gnocchi.
I don't even know what that is.
So it's gnocchi, but instead of being made out of potato, which always raises my blood sugar, like regardless of the potato, even if it's like a beautiful Japanese potato, sweet potato, or a purple potato, it raises my blood sugar. So gnocchi is made with cauliflower. That's the number one ingredient.
Oh, this is the Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's makes this too.
So Trader Joe's makes it. I have one that's, I'm not sure if the Trader Joe's is gluten-free. It probably is, but I have another brand in my fridge that I've got my eyes on for tonight.
Okay, cool. Well, I'd love to share that brand. If you remember what it is, or we'll put it in the show notes, because I do think when I looked, I haven't tried the Trader Joe's version, and I think there were some industrial seed oils I wasn't too keen on, and some like extra added flours. And sometimes these cauliflower products, they're like, it's cauliflower pizza. And you look and you're like, I know, it's rice flour pizza.
That's right.
They put some cauliflower flour in it, friends.
It's like cauliflower washing.
Yeah, seriously.
Instead of whitewashing, it's cauliflower washing. Yeah.
So true. Well, I love the way that you're showing up for yourself. I love how you're keeping your glucose in check. I think a lot of women are really torn on the keto thing because they're taught and told that carbohydrates are necessary for proper hormone balance. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because you've been in ketosis and you're very well versed in hormones.
Yeah, great question. So I wrote a new book about this because I really struggled with keto. So I tried it for the first time in 2015, 2016, and I would say it was an utter failure. Like I maybe got a little bit of mental acuity, that's supposed to be one of the benefits that you get from it, but nothing like the angels singing like my husband did when he went on keto.
Yeah.
And I did not lose weight. In fact, I gained weight the first time I did it. And so I thought, oh, maybe all that bacon and butter just wasn't the best thing for me. So let me try another way. So the second time I did it more watching my labs. So watching especially LDL, which can go up with the ketogenic diet. So I looked for inflammation and other problems, and I was more careful about my macros. And so I did like a 70-20-10, 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbs. And I would say, again, I didn't do that well. And I think the problem there was that I was eating too much fat for me. Yeah. And I think my detox pathways got completely screwed up. And so what I think is true with the ketogenic diet is that most of the data for sure is on men.
Yeah.
And women probably need some more carbohydrates. It depends on issues like carb intolerance and, where you are in your reproductive age. But I think we have to be careful about going too low carb with women, as you just mentioned, in terms of hormone balance. So we know that low carb can raise cortisol, it can cause thyroid dysfunction, and we want to be thoughtful about getting the fiber that you need to balance estrogen. So I designed a way for myself to do a ketogenic diet where I was getting into ketosis, not quite as deep as what I was before,
Still getting the benefits.
but still getting the benefits. And I lost 20 pounds, mostly fat. I did it with a lot of vegetables, so way better formulated, I would say, than, kind of the classic keto that I tried going back to 2015. And it really made a big difference. And I found that my hormones were in a better place. And then periodically I'll add back carbs. And often I stay in ketosis, even with increased carbs. So it's been fun to watch that.
It's interesting. I think if people, when they think you need fat to get into ketosis, it's just the absence of carbohydrates to get into ketosis. And then depending on your activity levels, the carb cycling can be such an amazing tool to add that back in as needed, but still kind of dip back into those low levels of ketones, which is, that's all the brain benefit that we're looking for, all that glucose control. When we do have carbohydrates, it's just so awesome. Well, I'm so excited for your next book because I read all your books and I've always loved everything you put out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I'm so excited to put this podcast out. I'm so excited for everyone to follow along. Where can they follow you, and where can they snag your books?
Well, my books are available anywhere books are sold. The new book is called Women, Food, and Hormones, and it's out on pre-order now. It publishes in September. I think the best place, I love watching you on Instagram. I think you have such an incredible social media presence, and I love hanging out on Instagram too. That's at Sara Gottfried MD. I've got a website, saragottfriedmd.com, but I would say, the place I'm really focused right now in terms of seeing patients and research is the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health, which is based in Pennsylvania, Villanova, Pennsylvania. So that's another great resource where you can learn more about how an academic center, Thomas Jefferson University, is really working to further the cause of integrative functional and precision medicine and really develop the evidence base so that mainstream and conventional physicians can learn how to do it and understand why it makes such a difference in patient care.
I love that so much because, as you mentioned earlier on the show, coming out of medical school and 30 minutes of nutrition and not knowing how to integrate these lifestyle factors like nutrition and sleep and, activity with, the labs that you're getting back when someone's pre-diabetic or, any of the disease states that are so highly influenced by these other recommendations. So I'm excited. I'll put a link to the Marcus Institute in the show notes so people can check it out if they're interested in finding a physician as well. So thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure. Good luck with your professional sports team today.
Thank you, Kelly. It was so fun to be with you. I love the light that you shine in the world. It's beautiful to watch and observe. And I love your smoothies. I make your smoothies regularly.
Oh, thanks. Well, we'll be in touch and I'll let you know when this podcast goes live.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.